So this guy is the guy, they call him the FCC's 5G crusader. He's a guy who cut all of the red tape and really pushed for the high-speed networks to be built by private businesses. He is also the guy who is one of the big forces behind telehealth, mainly for veterans and low-income Americans to be able to get to doctors on their smartphones or tablets or any other connected device, driving down the price and driving up the access to medicine all around the country. And he also, like Mike Rowe and I, believe in apprenticeships and everything else. I think this guy is a real warrior for what we believe are American truths. His name is Brendan Carr. He is a commissioner with the FCC. Brendan, how are you, sir?
Glenn, so good to join you. Really appreciate the chance to be with you. Big fan of everything you're doing. And listen, if you ever get in trouble at the FCC, if anyone files a profanity or indecency complaint against you, just don't mention you know me. It'll go a lot better.
It'll go a lot better. I know.
Smoother for you.
Yeah.
You and I never talked. That's our story going forward.
I know how this works. Anyway, I wanted to talk to you about two things. Let's start with TikTok. Everybody in the tech industry seems to be against Twitter. I mean, it's crazy by letting people talk how they are being accused of destroying free speech. It's an upside-down world. But TikTok, nobody seems to want to do anything about this. I've read your letter. I've read your reports on this. TikTok is extraordinarily dangerous to Americans. Can you fill in why it's a danger and why everybody in America seems to be focused on Twitter, including the White House, and not TikTok?
Well, it's quite amazing. And, TikTok is an example of this. And as we may get into Apple as well, when your product is, for better or worse, immensely popular with consumers, it's amazing what you can get away with. And I think TikTok is the prime example. It's popular with millions and millions of Americans, including young Americans. And they look at it and they think, well, this is just a fun platform for sharing videos and dance memes. And the reality is that's just the sheep's clothing. Underneath, it operates as a very sophisticated surveillance technology. Right in the terms of service, they reserve the right to get your biometrics, including face prints and voice prints, search and browsing history, keystroke patterns. The list goes on from there. And for years, they said, don't worry, this is stored outside of Beijing, not a big deal, even though our parent company is ByteDance, is based in Beijing. And, well, that's been revealed as nothing more than gaslighting. It turns out that, according to internal communications, quote, everything is seen inside China. And that's a massive, massive problem. In fact, their COO was testifying in Congress a couple weeks ago and was asked point blank, do you transfer U.S. user data to employees in Beijing who are themselves members of the CCP? And the COO said that she declined to answer that particular question. So that's troubling. There's also a new report that just came out that they had this Beijing-based operation that was attempting to surveil the location of specific Americans based on their usage of the TikTok application. And that's not to mention, obviously, the concerns that come from the content side, where Americans, including children as young as 10 years old, are being fed things like the blackout challenge that's literally convinced themselves, and some have done that and died as a result. So it's a national security threat, and it's something that parents should be worried about as well.
So explain because I've tried to explain this to my family. My kids are like, yeah, right, Dad, I got it. What is China going to do with my face print and my information? Can you explain why that's dangerous?
Yeah, it really is. And one way to think about it is there's a version of TikTok. TikTok itself isn't available in Beijing, but a version of it called Douyin, a sister app run by the parent company. And that application shows kids science experiments, museum exhibits, educational material. And then again, here in the U.S., it's showing kids the blackout challenge. So that's where the real danger comes. But also, if you step back, what's really happening when you're using TikTok, every time you swipe or click or search, what you're doing is you're feeding, training, and improving China's artificial intelligence, their AI. And China has said, we want to dominate the world in AI by 2030, and they're going to use it for authoritarian purposes, for surveillance, for exporting their control. So even if you step back from your own self and your own kids, and even TikTok itself, the idea that we're sending this data and these clicks back to Beijing is improving their AI, and that's going to come around and bite us in ways that are, again, unrelated to TikTok itself.
So we have Google doing the same thing. I mean, that's why Google was free, is they wanted all that information to work on AI. So you're saying this is just another version of Google, if you will, that's here in America to be able to mine for all of that information.
Yeah, you're right. China has a fundamental flaw both in their system of government, obviously, but it carries through to AI, which is they don't have feedback loops. They don't understand sort of Western free thinking. And so they need Americans to be on TikTok, to be observing their usage of data in order to create their AI and make it a healthy system. So the sooner we cut off data flows back to Beijing, the sooner their version of AI starts to atrophy and go down a separate path in which it's going to be a lot less successful. So I think we do need to look broadly. How do we stop training China's artificial intelligence? But again, that's a piece of it. It's used for surveillance. It can be used for blackmail. It can be used for foreign influence campaigns. And where things are right now is this is in the court of the Biden administration. The Treasury Department has a group called CFIUS, Committee on Foreign Investment, and they've been reviewing TikTok for over a year at this point. And the New York Times reports that they've got a preliminary deal in place to allow TikTok to continue to operate. And frankly, I think this is a big IQ test for the administration, and it's sort of a pass-fail at this point. And in fact, you just had FBI Director Chris Wray testify last week in Congress and said that the FBI has serious national security concerns. So I don't see how the Biden administration can go forward and bless TikTok to continue to operate when you have the FBI, when you have Democrat Senator Mark Warner, chair of the Senate Intel Committee, saying that it is TikTok that scares the dickens out of him. But we may very well be heading towards that direction here.
Google Play Store, Apple App Store. I know you wrote a letter to both of them and said, drop this. This is really bad for the country.
Yeah, I mean, putting aside the content of what's in this application, Google and Apple have very clear terms of service to stay in the App Store. And if data is being used for purposes that aren't being disclosed, or if data is traveling to countries and being accessed from countries without that being properly disclosed, there's precedent for Google and Apple to boot apps off the App Store for that reason. And so I wrote them a letter and said, look, in light of the national security concerns, in light of these clearly surreptitious data flows that we're now learning about, just apply the terms of your App Store policies and boot them from the App Store. Of course, they didn't do that. And that's why it's, obviously highly ironic that there was at least the concern this week that Apple might take action against TikTok. Because, look, if you're pulling advertising dollars or pulling support, in Apple's case, potentially from Twitter, while keeping your support or expanding your advertising on TikTok, you are sending quite the signal about your brand value. I think it's very different than the one you think.
One last thing, because I've got something else I want to talk to you about, but one last thing on this. You just kind of brushed over this, but I think it is critical. There was a new survey out that showed, I can't remember, 6 or 8 out of 10 children in China want to be astronauts and want to be scientists. Here, 8 in 10 want to be social media movers.
Influencers,
yeah.
Yep.
That's crazy. And part of that is because of TikTok. As you said, the same thing under a different name over in China is encouraging people to do crazy great things and science and knowledge and education. And this same platform is programmed here to really make you as dumb as a box of rocks. I don't think that's just, oh, really? I didn't even notice that. That's intentional.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, this is why I've talked about TikTok as China's digital fentanyl, because it's effectively, a pipe directly from Beijing, from the CCP, into the ears and eyes and minds of millions and millions of America's youth. And what they're being served is divisive content. It's content that is, increasing ADHD problems, suicide ideations, body image issues. This is what is being fed to us, and that's deeply deeply concerning. And that's why I think, it's incumbent on the Biden administration to step in and take some tough action here.
Brendan Carr, FCC Commissioner, if you don't mind, I need to take a 1-minute break because I'm actually, being funded by, the private industry and market. But take 1 minute. We'll be back with Brendan Carr, FCC Commissioner. So, Brendan, I have a philosophical question. And I'd like you, if you would, noodle this out. I tried to contact you a few weeks ago because I was presented with a story of a book that was in a school library and being read to kids in school. And it was one of the most vile things I have ever read. And look, I've done this for 40 plus years. I know exactly what I can and can't say with the FCC, okay? And I've always understood those to be community standards, et cetera, et cetera. Here's my problem. There are times when things need to be heard by the general public, and I know we can go online and do it, et cetera, et cetera. But why, when we are a community standards-based system, if you can teach it to my children and have it in the classroom, why can't I, a program that is aimed at adults and during the day when kids should be in school, why can't I read that book on the air?
Well, you're right. Look, we still have in place at the FCC rules that apply to broadcast radio and broadcast television that regulate profanity, indecency, similar content like that. It obviously hasn't been enforced very much in the last few years, but they're still on the books. And so you're right. There is a point at which potentially you reading things from across the broadcast airwaves that may be found in a library somewhere could have issues under the FCC's, profanity and indecency regulations. Now, of course, there tends to be a newsworthy exception to a lot of that stuff, so you can cover issues and things like that. But it's a challenge. And some people say, look, how do you generally square this pro-speech, free speech view with that type of stuff? And I would say, look, what we can speak of as adults and talk about freely is very different, than the content that should be, stocking the shelves of, school libraries for kindergartners.
Yeah, my problem is this is a show that is based on information and opinion. You may not like it, but we take it we take our job seriously. We try to be responsible. I've always been responsible with the FCC. And it's not a 1990s Howard Stern kind of thing, which we're way past that. This is being read to our students in many schools all across the country. And it is absolutely indecent. And I know it's indecent. But why do I get in trouble for exposing this indecency? And the way to expose it is to make people understand by hearing it how unbelievably indecent it is.
Yeah, look, I think we've gone a long way recently in trying to address this issue by doing what you're doing. We've had instances where parents have tried to read books from their, again, kindergarten library at school board meetings, at city council meetings, and they've been shut down and said we can't allow that content to be spoken at these city council meetings. Yet, there it is in the kids' classroom. And so I do think there's been some progress in that. Look, from my perspective, I remember, I growing up in high school, the famous Eminem song, the FCC Won't Let Me Be. And it's quite ironic after humming that song in high school that I've ended up at the FCC. And look, we try to be very, pro-free speech about this stuff, but this is an issue that we're dealing with as a cultural matter right now.
And I would not have a problem if it were me possibly losing my license, but I lose the license. Anything I do could possibly jeopardize the license of every station in my chain. So there's no way I'm going to put people out of work to prove this. What do you recommend?
Right. Well, look, again, there's, a newsworthy exception to discussing some of this stuff. But, look, if you think it could be good or bad, I don't know. But, if it's close to the line, there still are background indecency, profanity rules of the FCC. We do get complaints from time to time. I mean, we usually dismiss them or don't address in the main. But, yeah, you do potentially subject yourself to FCC scrutiny in those cases.
My problem is I had some of the best attorneys in Washington on free speech and FCC. I've always had that. I have for 25 years. About 3 years ago, they called. They also represent Google and Apple and Facebook. And they dropped me in the middle of a case as a client because it made their other clients uncomfortable and they had to make a choice. So I'm not sure if you will see me and my attorney at some point because, it's hard to get one if you have to have my opinion today. Brendan, thank you so much. I appreciate all that you do at the FCC. God bless.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
You bet. Brendan Carr, FCC Commissioner.